Hi everyone, this is Nina. I am starting on chapter 15 of Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And also, I wanted to let you know that if you are just tuning in to this chapter, please go to my playlist, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and start from the beginning. I know a lot of people are using this as a relaxation time. So, however, if you just want to enjoy the story, or if you want just someone to read to you, like when we were little kids and our moms or dads would read to us and help us to gently fall asleep, you can use it for that too. So, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started. Chapter 15 of Tom's New Master and Various Other Matters. Since the thread of our humble hero's life has now become interwoven with that of higher ones, it is necessary to give some brief introduction to them. Augustine St. Clair was the son of a wealthy planter of Louisiana. The family had its origin in Canada. Of two brothers, very similar in temperament and character, one had settled on the flourishing farm in Vermont, and the other became an opulent planter in Louisiana. The mother of Augustine was a Huguenot French lady whose family had emigrated to Louisiana during the days of its early settlement. Augustine and another brother were the only children of their parents, having inherited from his mother an exceeding delicacy of constitution. He was, at the instance of physicians, during many years of his boyhood, sent to the care of his uncle in Vermont, in order that his constitution might be strengthened by the cold of the bracing climate. In childhood, he was remarkable for an extreme and marked sensitiveness of character, more akin to the softness of a woman than the ordinary hardness of his own sex. Time, however, overgrew this softness with the rough bark of manhood, and but few knew how living and fresh it still lay at the core. His talents were of the very first order, although his mind showed a preference always for the ideal and the aesthetic, and there was about him that repugnance to the actual business of life, which is the common result of this balance of the faculties. Soon after the completion of his college courses, his whole nature was kindled into one intense and passionate effervescence of romance passion. His hour came, the hour that comes only once. His star rose in the horizon, that star that rises so often in vain, to be remembered only as a thing of dreams, and it rose for him in vain. To drop the figure, he saw and won the love of a high-minded and beautiful woman in one of the northern states, and they were affianced. He returned south to make arrangements for their marriage when, most unexpectedly, his letters were returned to him by Mel, with a short note from her guardian stating to him that ere this reached him the lady would be the wife of another. Stung to madness, he vainly hoped, as many another has done, to fling the whole thing from his heart by one desperate effort. Too proud to supplicate or seek explanation, he threw himself at once into a whirl of fashionable society, and in a fortnight from the time of the fatal letter was the accepted lover of the reigning belle of the season, and as soon as arrangements could be made, he became the husband of a fine figure, a pair of bright dark eyes, and $100,000, and of course everybody thought him a happy fellow. The married couple were enjoying their honeymoon and entertaining a brilliant circle of friends in their splendid villa near Lake Pontchartrain, when one day a letter was brought to him in that well-remembered writing. It was handed to him while he was in full tide of gay and successful conversation in a whole room full of company. He turned deadly pale when he saw the writing, but still preserved his composure and finished the playful warfare of the vintage which he was at the moment carrying on with the lady opposite, and a short time after was missed from the circle. In his room, alone, he opened and read the letter, now worse than idle and useless to be read. It was from her, giving a long account of a prosecution to which she had been exposed by her guardian's family, to lead her to unite herself with their son, and she related how, for a long time, his letters had ceased to arrive, how she had written time and again, till she became weary and doubtful, how her health had failed under her anxieties, and how at last she had discovered the whole fraud which had been practiced on them both. The letter ended with expressions of hope and thankfulness, and professions of undying affection, which were more bitter than death to the unhappy young man. He wrote to her immediately, "I have received yours, but too late. I believed all I heard. I was desperate. I am married, and all is over. Only forget, it is all that remains for either of us." And thus ended the whole romance and idyll of life for Augustine St. Clair. But the real remained, the real, like the flat, bare, oozing tide mud, when the blue sparkling wave, with all of its company of gliding boats and white-winged ships, its music of oars and chiming waters, has gone down, and there it lies, flat, slimy, bare, exceedingly real. Of course, in a novel, people's hearts break and they die, and that is the end of it. And in a story, this is very convenient. But in real life, we do not die when all that makes life bright dies to us. There is the most busy and important round of eating, drinking, dressing, walking, visiting, buying, selling, talking, reading, and all that makes up what is commonly called living, yet to be gone through, and this his wife been a whole woman, she might yet have done something, as women can, to mend the broken threads of life and weave again into a tissue of brightness. But Marie St. Clair could not even see that they had been broken. As before stated, she consisted of a fine figure, a pair of splendid eyes, and $100,000. And none of these items were precisely the ones that minister to the mind deceased. When Augustine, pale as death, was found lying on the sofa and pleaded sudden sick headache as the cause of his distress, she recommended to him to smell of hartshorn, and when the paleness and the headache came on week after week, she only said that she never thought Mr. St. Clair was sickly, but it seems he was very liable to sick headaches, and that it was a very unfortunate thing for her, because he didn't enjoy going into company with her, and it seemed odd to go so much alone when they were just married. Augustine was glad in his heart that he had married so undiscerning a woman, but as the glosses and civilities of honeymoon wore away, he discovered that a beautiful young woman, who has lived all of her life to be caressed and waited on, might prove quite a hard mistress in domestic life. Marie never had possessed such capabilities of affection or much sensibility, and the little that she had been merged into a most intense and unconscious selfishness, a selfishness the more hopeless from its quiet obtuseness, its utter ignorance of any claims but her own. From her infancy she had been surrounded with servants who lived only to study her caprices. The ideas that they had either feelings or rights had never dawned upon her. even in distant perspective. Her father, whose only child she had never denied her anything that lay within the compass of human possibility, and when she entered life, beautiful, accomplished, and an heiress, she had, of course, all the eligibles and non-eligibles of the other sex sighing at her feet, and she had no doubt that Augustine was the most fortunate man in having obtained her. It is a great mistake to suppose that a woman with no heart will be an easy creditor in the exchange of affection. There is not on earth a more merciless extractor of love from others than a thoroughly selfless woman, and the more unloving she grows, the more scrumptiously she exacts love to the uttermost farthing. When, therefore, St. Clair began to drop off those gallantries and small attentions which flowed at first through the habitude of courtship, he found his sultana no way ready to resign her salve. There were abundance of tears, poutings, and small tempests. They were discontents, pinings, upbraidings. St. Clair was good-natured and self-indulgent, and sought to buy off with presents and flatteries. And when Marie became mother to a beautiful daughter, he really felt awkward, for a time, to something like tenderness. St. Clair's mother had been a woman of uncommon elevation and purity of character, and he gave to this child his mother's name, fondly fancying that she would prove a reproduction of her image. The thing had been remarked about petulant jealousy by his wife, and she regarded her husband's absorbing devotion to the child with suspicion and dislike. All that was given to her seemed so much taken from her. From the time of the birth of this child, her health gradually sank. A life of constant inaction, bodily and mental, the friction of ceaseless ennui and discontent, united to the ordinary weakness which attended the period of maternity, in course of the few years changed the blooming young belle into a yellow-faded, sickly woman, whose time was divided among a variety of fanciful diseases, and who had considered herself in every sense the most ill-used and suffering person in existence. There was no end of her various complaints, but her principal forte appeared to be sick headache, which sometimes would confine her to her room for 3 out of 6 days. As of course all family arrangements fell into the hands of the servants, St. Clair found his menage anything but comfortable. His only daughter was exceedingly delicate, and he feared that, with no one to look after her and attend to her, her health and life might yet fall a sacrifice to her mother's inefficiency. He had taken her with him on a tour to Vermont, and had persuaded his cousin, Miss Ophelia St. Clair, to return with him to his southern residence, and they are now returning on this boat, where we have introduced them to our readers. And now, while the distant domes and spires of New Orleans rise to our view, there is yet time for an introduction to Miss Ophelia. Whoever was traveled in the New England states will remember, in some cool village, the large farmhouse with its clean-swept grassy yard, shaded by the dense and massive foliage of the sugar maple, and remember the air of order and stillness, a perpetuary and unchanging repose. They seemed to breathe over the whole place. Nothing lost or out of order, not a picket loose in the fence, not a particle of litter in the tuffy yard, with its clumps of lilac bushes growing up from under the windows. Within he will remember wide, clean rooms, where nothing ever seems to be doing or going to be done, where everything is once and forever rigidly in place, and where all household arrangements move with the punctual exactness of the old clock in the corner. In the family keeping room, as it is termed, he will remember the stained, respectable old bookcase with its glass doors, where Rawlings' History, Milton's Paradise Lost, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and Scott's Family Bible stood side by side in decorous order, with multitudes of other books equally solemn and respectful. There are no servants in the house, but the lady in the snowy cap with spectacles, who sits sewing every afternoon among her daughters, as if nothing ever had been done or were to be done. She and her girls, in their long-forgotten fore-part of the day, did up the work, and for the rest of the time, probably at all hours, when you could see them, it was done up. The old kitchen floor never seemed stained or spotted. The tables, the chairs, and the various cooking utensils never seemed arranged or disordered. Though 3 and sometimes 4 meals a day are got there, though the family washings and ironing is there performed, and though pounds of butter and cheese are in some silent and mysterious manner there brought into existence. On such a farm, in such a house and family, Miss Ophelia had spent a quiet existence of some 45 years when her cousin invited her to visit his southern mansion. The eldest of a large family, she was still considered by her father and mother as one of the children, and the proposal that she should go to Orleans was the most momentous one to the family circle. The old, gray-headed father took down Morris's atlas out of the bookcase and looked out at the exact latitude and longitude and read Flint's Travels in the South and West to make up his own mind as to the nature of the country. The good mother inquired anxiously if Orleans wasn't as awful wicked place, saying that it seemed to her most equal to going to the Sandwich Islands or anywhere among the heathen. It was known at the minister's and at the doctor's and at Miss Peabody Maliner's shop that Ophelia St. Clair was talking about going away down to Orleans with her cousin, and of course the whole village could do no less than help this very important process of talking about the matter. The minister, who inclined strongly to abolitionist views, was quite doubtful whether such a step might not tend somewhat to encourage the Southerners in holding on to their slaves, while the doctor, who was a staunch colonizationist, inclined to the opinion that Miss Ophelia ought to go to show the Orleans people that we don't think hardly of them after all. He was of opinion, in fact, that Southern people needed encouraging, when, however, the fact that she had resolved to go was fully before the public mind, and she was solemnly invited out to tea by all of her friends and neighbors for the space of the fortnight, and her prospects and plans duly canvassed and inquired into. Miss Mosley, who came into the house to help to do the dressmaking, acquired daily accessions of importance from the developments with regard to Miss Ophelia's wardrobe, which she had been enabled to make. It was credibly ascertained that Squire St. Clair, as his name was commonly contracted in the neighborhood, had counted out $50 and had given them to Miss Ophelia, and told her to buy any clothes she thought best, and that 2 new silk dresses and a bonnet had been sent for her from Boston. As to the propriety of this extraordinary outlay, the public mind was divided, some affirming that it was well enough, all things considered, for once in one's life, and others stoutly affirming that the money had better have been sent to the missionaries, but all parties agreed that there had been no such parcel seen in those parts as had been sent from New York, and one that she had one silk dress that might fairly be trusted to stand alone, whatever might be said of its mistress. They were credible rumors, also, of a hem-stitched pocket handkerchief, and report even went so far as to state that Miss Ophelia had one pocket handkerchief with lace all around it. It was even added that it had worked in the corners, and this latter point was never satisfactorily ascertained and remains in fact unsettled to this day. Miss Ophelia, as you now behold her, stands before you in a very shiny brown linen traveling dress, tall, square-formed, and angular. Her face was thin and rather sharp in its outlines, the lips compressed like those of a person who, in the habit of making up her mind defiantly on all subjects, while the keen dark eyes had a particularly searching advised movement and traveled all over everywhere, as if they were looking for something to take care of. All of her movements were sharp, decided, and energetic, and though she was never much of a talker, her words were remarkably direct and to the purpose when she did speak. In her habits, she was a living imposition of order, method, and exactness. In punctuality, she was as inevitable as a clock, and as inexorable as a railroad engine, and she held in most decided contempt and abomination anything of a contrary character. The great sin of sins in her eyes, the sum of all evils, was expressed by one very common and important word in her vocabulary: shiftlessness. Her final and ultimatum of contempt consisted in the very emphatic pronunciation of the word, shiftless, and by this she characterized all modes of procedure which did not a direct and inevitable relation to accomplishment of some purpose then definitely had in mind. People who did nothing, or who did not know exactly what they were going to do, or did not take the most direct way to accomplish what they set their hands to, were objects of her entire contempt. A contempt shown less frequently by everything she said than by a kind of stony grimness, as if she scorned to say anything about the matter. As to mental cultivation, she had a clear, strong, active mind as well, and read thoroughly in history and the older English classics, and thought was great strength within certain narrow limits. Her theological tenets were all made up, labeled in most positive and distinct forms, and put but like bundles in her patch trunk. There were just so many of them, and there were never to be any more. So unless were her ideas with regard to most matters of practical life, such as housekeeping in all of its branches, and the various political relations of her native village, all underlaying all, deeper than anything else, higher and broader, lay the strongest principle of her being conscientiousness. Nowhere in her conscience so dominant of all absorbing as in New England women. It is a granite formation which lies deepest and rises out, even to the tops of the highest mountains. Miss Ophelia was the absolute bond-slave of the ought. Once make her certain that the path of duty, as she commonly phrased it, lay in any given direction, and fire and water could not keep her from it. She would walk straight down into a well or up to a loaded cannon's mouth, if she were only quite sure that there the path lay. Her standard of right was so high, so all-embracing, so minute, and making so few concessions to human frailty, that though she strove with heroic ardor to reach it, she actually never did so, and of course was burdened with a constant and often harassing sense of deficiency. This gave a severe and somewhat gloomy cast to her religious character. But how in the world can Miss Ophelia get along with Augustine St. Clair? Gay, easy, unpunctual, unpractical, skeptical, in short, walking with impudent and nonchalant freedom over every one of her most cherished habits and opinions. To tell the truth then, Miss Ophelia loved him. When a boy, he had been hers to teach him his chastism, mend his clothes, comb his hair, and bring him up generally in the way he should go, and her heart having a warm side to it, Augustine had, as he usually did with most people, monopolized a large share of it for himself, and therefore it was that he succeeded very easily in persuading her that the path of duty lay in the directions of New Orleans, and that she must go with him to take care of Ava, and keep everything from going to wreck and ruin during the frequent illnesses of his wife. The idea of a house without anybody to care of it went to her heart. Then she loved the lovely little girl as few could help doing, and though she regarded Augustine as very much of a heathen, yet she loved him, laughed at his jokes, and forbore with his failings to an extent which those who knew him thought perfectly incredible. But what more or other is there to be known of Miss Ophelia? Our reader must discover by a personal acquaintance. There she is, sitting now in her stateroom, surrounded by a mixed multitude of little and big carpet bags, boxes, baskets, each containing some separate responsibility, which she is tying, binding up, packing, or fastening with a face of great earnestness. Now, Ava, have you kept count of your things? Of course you haven't. Children never do. There's the spotted carpet bag and the little blue bandbox with your best bonnet. That's 2. Then the India rubber satchel is 3, and my tape and needle box is 4, and my bandbox 5, and my collar box 6, and that little hair trunk 7. What have you done with your sunshade? Give it to me and let me put a paper round it and tie it to my umbrella with my shade there. There, now. Why, Auntie, we are only going up home. What is the use? To keep it nice, child. People must take care of their things, if they ever mean to have anything. And now, Ava, is your thimble put up? Really, Auntie? I don't know. Well, never mind. I'll look your box over. Thimble, wax, 2 spoons, scissors, knife, tape needle. All right. Put in here. What did you ever do, child, when you were coming on your own with your papa? I should have thought you'd have lost everything you had. Well, Auntie, I did lose a great many, and then when we stopped anywhere, Papa would buy some more of whatever it was. Mercy on us, child, what a way. It was a very easy way, Auntie, said Ava. It's a dreadful, shiftless one, said Auntie. Why, Auntie, what'll you do now, said Ava. That trunk is too full to be shut down. It must shut down, said Auntie with an air of a general, as she squeezed the things in and sprang upon the lid. Still, a little gap remained about the mouth of the trunk. Get up here, Ava, said Miss Ophelia courageously. What has been done can be done again. This trunk has got to be shut and locked. There are no 2 ways about it. And the trunk, intimidated doubtless by this resolute statement, gave in. The hasp snapped sharply into its hole, and Miss Ophelia turned the key and pocketed it with triumph. Now we're ready. Where's your papa? I think it's time this baggage was set out. Do look out, Ava, and see if you see your papa. Oh, yes, he's down the other end of the gentleman's cabin, eating an orange. He can't know how near we are coming, said Auntie. Hadn't you better run and speak to him? Papa never is in a hurry about anything, said Ava, and we haven't come to the landing. Do step on the guards, Auntie. Look, there's our house, up that street. The boat now began with heavy groans, like some vast tired monster, to prepare to push up among the multiplied steamers at the levee. Ava joyously pointed out the various spires, domes, and waymarks by which she recognized her native city. Yes, yes, dear, very fine, said Miss Ophelia, but mercy on us, the boat has stopped. Where is your father? And now ensued the usual turmoil of landing, waiters running 20 ways at once, men tugging trunks, carpet-bags, boxes, women anxiously calling to their children, and everybody crowding in a dense mass to the plank towards the landing. Aunt Ophelia seated herself resolutely on the lately vanquished trunk, and, marshalling all her goods and chattels in fine military order, seemed resolved to defend them to the last. Shall I take your trunk, ma'am? Shall I take your baggage? Let me attend to your baggage, missus. Shan't I carry these out, your missus? Rained down upon her unheeded. She sat with grim determination, upright as a darning needle stuck in a board, holding on to her bundle of umbrella and parasols, and replying with a determination that was enough to strike dismay even into a hackman, wondering to Ava in each interval what upon earth her papa could be thinking of. He couldn't have fallen over now, but something must have happened, and just as she had begun to work herself into real distress, he came up with his usually careless motion, and giving Ava a quarter of the orange he was eating, said, "Well, Cousin Vermont, I suppose you are all ready." "I've been ready, waiting nearly an hour," said Miss Ophelia. "I began to be really concerned about you." "That's a clever fellow now," said he. "Well, the carriage is waiting and the crowd are now off, so that one can walk out in a decent and Christian manner and not be pushed and shoved. Here," he added to the driver who stood beside him, "take these things." "I'll go and see to his putting them in," said Miss Ophelia. "Ah, pshaw, cousin, what's the use?" said St. Clair. "Well, at any rate, I'll carry this and this and this," said Miss Ophelia, singling out 3 boxes and a small carpet-bag. "Dear, my dear Miss Vermont, positively you must have come the Green Mountains over us that way. You must adopt at least a piece of a Southern principle, and not walk out under all that load. They'll take you for a waiting maid. Give them to this fellow. He'll put them down as if they were eggs now." Miss Ophelia looked despairingly as her cousin took all of her treasures from her, and rejoiced to find herself once more in the carriage with them, in a state of preservation. "Where's Tom?" said Ava. "Oh, he's on the outside, pussy. I'm going to take Tom up to Mother for a peace offering, and make up for that drunken fellow that upset the carriage." "Oh, Tom will make a splendid driver, I know," said Ava. "He'll never get drunk." The carriage stopped in front of the ancient mansion, built in that odd mixture of Spanish and French style, of which there were specimens in some parts of New Orleans. It was built in the Moorish fashion. A square building enclosed a courtyard, into which the carriage drove through an arched gateway. The court, in the inside, had evidently been arranged to gratify a picturesque and voluptuous idylity. Wide galleries ran all around the 4 sides, whose Moorish acres, slender pillars, and arabesque ornaments carried the mind back, as in a dream, to the reign of the Oriental romance in Spain. In the middle of the court, a fountain threw high its silvery water, falling in a never-ceasing spray into a marble basin, fringed with a deep border of fragrant violets. The water in the fountain, polished as crystal, was alive with the myriads of gold and silver fishes, twinkling and darting through it like so many living jewels. Around the fountain ran a walk, paved with a mosaic of pebbles, laid in the various fanciful patterns, and, this again, was surrounded by turf, smooth as green velvet, while a carriage drive enclosed the whole. 2 large orange trees, now fragrant with blossoms, threw a delicious shade, and ranged in a circle round upon the turf, where marble vases of arabesque sculpture containing the choicest flowering plants of the tropics. Huge pomegranate trees with their glossy leaves and the flame-colored flowers, dark-leaved Arabian jessamines with their silvery stars, geraniums, luxuriant roses bending beneath their heavy abundance of flowers, golden jessamines, lemon-scented verbena, all united their blooms and fragrances, while here and there a mystic old aloe with its strange massive leaves sat looking like some hoary old encounter, sitting in weird grandeur among the more perishable bloom and fragrance around it. The galleries that surrounded the court were festooned with the curtain of some kind of Moorish stuff, and could be drawn down at pleasure to exclude the beams of the sun. On the whole, the appearance of the place was luxurious and romantic. As the carriage drove in, Ava seemed like a bird ready to burst from a cage with the wild eagerness of her delight. "Oh, isn't it beautiful? Lovely, my own dear, darling home," she said to Miss Ophelia. "Isn't it beautiful?" "'Tis a pretty place," said Miss Ophelia, as she alighted, "though it looks rather old and heathenish to me." Tom got down from the carriage and looked about with an air of calm, still enjoyment. The Negro, it must be remembered, is an exotic of the most gorgeous and superb countries of the world, and he has deep in his heart a passion for all that is splendid, rich, and fanciful, a passion which, rudely indulged by untrained taste, draws on them the ridicule of the colder and more current white race. St. Clair, who was open in his heart, a poetical voluptuary, smiled at Miss Ophelia, made her remark on his premises, and turned to Tom, who was standing around looking, his beaming black face perfectly radiant with admiration. He said, "Tom, my boy, this seems to suit you." "Yes, master, it looks about the right thing," said Tom. All that passed in a moment while trunks were being hustled off, hackmen paid, and while a crowd of all ages and sizes, men, women, and children, came running through the galleries, both above and below, to see the masters come in. Foremost among them was a highly dressed young mulatto man, evidently a very distinguished parsonage, attired in the ultra extreme of mode, and gracefully waving a scented cambric handkerchief in his hand. Personage had been exerting himself with great alacrity in driving all the flock of the domestics to the other end of the veranda. "Back, all of you! I am ashamed of you," he said in a tone of authority. "Would you intrude on master's domestic relations in the first hour of his return?" All looked abashed at this elegant speech, delivered with quite an air, and stood huddled together at a respectful distance, except two stout porters, who came up and began conveying away the baggage. Owing to Mr. Adolph's systematic arrangements, when St. Clair turned around from paying the hackman, there was nobody in view but Mr. Adolph himself, conspicuous in satin vest, gold guard chain, and white pants, and bowing with inexpressible grace and sovereignty. "Oh, Adolph, is it you?" said the master, offering his hand to him. "How are you, boy?" while Adolph poured forth with great fluency an extemporary speech which he had been preparing with great care for a fortnight before. "Well, well," said St. Clair, passing on with his usual air of neglect drollery. "That's very well got up, Adolph. See that the baggage is well bestowed. I'll come to the people in a minute." And so saying, he led Miss Ophelia to a large parlor that opened onto the veranda. While they had been passing, Ava had flown like a bird through the porch and parlor to a little boudoir opening likewise on the veranda. A tall, dark-eyed, shallow woman half rose from the couch on which she was reclining. "Mamma," said Ava, in a sort of rapture, throwing herself around her neck and embracing her over and over again. "That'll do. Take care, child. Don't you make my head ache," said the mother, after she had languidly kissed her. St. Clair came in and embraced his wife in a true, unorthodox, husbandly fashion, and then presented to her his cousin. Marie lifted her large eyes on her cousin with an air of curiosity and received her with liquid politeness. A crowd of servants now pressed to the entry door, and among them a middle-aged mulatto woman of very respectful appearance stood foremost in a tremor of expectation and joy at the door. "Oh, there's Mammy," said Ava as she flew across the room, and throwing herself into her arms, she kissed her repeatedly. This woman did not tell her that she made her head ache, but, on the contrary, she hugged her and laughed and cried till her sanity was a thing to be doubted of, and then, released from her, Ava flew from one to another, shaking hands and kissing in the way that Miss Ophelia afterwards declared fairly turned her stomach. "Well," said Miss Ophelia, "you Southern children can do something I couldn't." "What, now, pray?" said St. Clair. "Well, I want to be kind to everybody, and I wouldn't have anything hurt, but as to kissing—" "Niggers," said St. Clair. "That's what you're up to, eh?" "Yes, that's it. How can she?" St. Clair laughed as he went into the passage. "Hollo here! What's to pay out here? Here, y'all, Mammy, Jimmy, Pokey, Sukey, glad to see master," he said as he went shaking hands from one to another. "Look out for the babies," he added as he stumbled over a sooty little urchin who was crawling upon all fours. "If I step on anybody, let 'em mention it." There was an abundance of laughing and blessing masters, and St. Clair distributed small pieces of change among them. "Come, now, take yourself off like good boys and girls," he said, and the whole assemblage, dark and light, disappeared through the door into the large veranda, followed by Ava, who carried a large satchel which she had been filling with apples, nuts, candy, ribbons, laces, and toys of every description during her whole homeward journey. As St. Clair turned to go back, his eye fell upon Tom, who was standing uneasily, shifting from one foot to the other, while Adolphe stood neglectedly leaning against the banisters, examining Tom through an opera glass with an air that would have done credit to any dandy living. "Ha! You puppy," said the master, striking down the opera glass. "Is that the way you treat your company? Seems to me, Dolph," he added, laying his finger on the elegant figured satin vest that Adolphe was sporting. "Seems to me that's my vest." "Oh, master, this vest all stained with wine, of course. A gentleman's in master's standing never wears a vest like this. I understood I was to take it. It does for a poor nigger fellow like me." And Adolphe tossed his head and passed his finger through his scented hair with a grace. "So that's it, is it?" said St. Clair carelessly. "Well, here, I'm going to show this Tom to his mistress, and then you take him to the kitchen, and mind you don't put on any of your airs to him. He's worth 2 such puppies as you." "Master always will have his jokes," said Adolphe, laughing. "I'm delighted to see master in such spirits." "Here, Tom," said St. Clair, beckoning. Tom entered the room. He looked wistfully on the velvet carpets and before unimagined splendors of the mirrors, pictures, statues, and curtains, and, like the Queen of Sheba before Solomon, there was no more spirit in him. He looked afraid even to set his feet down. "See here, Marie," said St. Clair to his wife, "I bought you a coachman, at last, to order. I tell you he's a regular hearse for the blackness and sobriety, and will drive you like a funeral if you want. Open your eyes now and look at him. Now, don't say I never think about you when I'm gone." Marie opened her eyes and fixed them on Tom without rising. "I know he'll get drunk," she said. "No, he's warranted a pious and sober article." "Well, I hope he may turn out well," said the lady. "It's more than I expect, though." "Dolph," said St. Clair, "show Tom downstairs, and mind yourself," he added. "Remember what I told you." Adolphe tripped gracefully forward, and Tom, with lumbering tread, went after. "He's a perfect behemoth," said Marie. "Come now, Marie," said St. Clair, seating himself on a stool beside her sofa, "be gracious and say something pretty to a fellow." "You've been gone a fortnight beyond the time," said the lady, pouting. "Well, you know I wrote you the reason." "Such a short, cold letter," said the lady. "Dear me, the mail was just going, and it had to be that or nothing." That's just the way, always, said the lady. Always something to make your journeys long and letters short. See here now, he added, drawing an elegant velvet case out of his pocket and opening it. Here's a present I got for you in New York. It's a daguerreotype, clear and soft as an engraving, representing Ava and her father sitting hand in hand. Maria looked at it with a dissatisfied air. What made you sit in such an awkward position? She said. Well, the position may be a matter of opinion, but what do you think of the likeness? If you don't think anything of my opinion in one case, I suppose you wouldn't in another, said the lady, shutting the daguerreotype. Hang the woman, said St. Clair, mentally, but aloud he added, Come now, Marie, what do you think of the likeness? Don't be so nonsensical now. It's very inconsiderate of you, St. Clair, said the lady, to insist on my talking and looking at things. You know I've been laying all day with a sick headache, and there's been such a tumult made ever since you came, I'm half dead. You're subject to the sick headache, ma'am, said Miss Ophelia, suddenly rising from the depths of the large armchair where she had sat quietly, taking an inventory of the furniture and calculating its expense. Yes, I'm a perfect martyr to it, said the lady. Juniper berry tea is good for sick headaches, said Miss Ophelia. At least August, Deaton Abraham Perry's wife, used to say so, and she was a great nurse. I'll have the first juniper berries that get ripe in our garden by the lake brought in for them for that special purpose, said St. Clair, gravely pulling the bell as he did so. Meanwhile, cousin, you must be wanting to retire to your apartment and refresh yourself a little after your journey. Dolph, he added, tell Mammy to come here. The decent mulatto woman whom Ava had caressed so rapturously soon entered. She was dressed neatly with a high red and yellow turban on her head, the recent gift of Ava, and which the child had been arranging on her head. Mammy, said St. Clair, I put this lady under your care. She is tired and wants rest. Take her to her chambers and be sure she is made comfortable. And Miss Ophelia disappeared in the rear of Mammy.